Good morning and welcome to the swimming edition of our Women's Leaders Moving Forward Together series. Today I'm joined by Elaine Howley, who is an amazing swimmer, very inspirational. I, of course, am Adina O'Neill. I am the founder and head coach at Team Be Real, where we build belief, belonging, and confidence in all athletes. And today's topic is going to be similar to all the other topics. It will just be wonderful that we have Elaine Howley with us. And I'll give you a brief introduction as we are getting her on the video. And then I'll let her introduce herself as well. But if you are a swimmer, an outdoor swimmer, a marathon swimmer, open water enthusiast, you probably know Elaine because she is a wonderful swimmer on her own right, has wonderful, a long list of support swimming that she's done as well. I'm just kind of talking you up while I was waiting for us to get this going. And here she is, Elaine. Hello, good morning.
Hi, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks so much for taking your time out of your schedule to chat with us about Women's History Month. I was just saying that this is kind of like the more swimming edition because we are now in the presence of a very amazing and extraordinary swimmer and support swimmer, which I think is I admire that as much as I admire your swimming accomplishments because as you and I both know as marathon swimmers, it's not just the person who's doing the swimming who gets it done. So um, that's exciting. I will be shocked if swimming does not come up in our conversation, but we'll see what happens. Uh, can you just kick it off by telling everybody who you are, what you do, and how? Well, I already kind of explained how we know each other through swimming,
Yeah,
but if you want to add anything to that, you can do that too.
sure. Okay, so I'm Elaine Howley. I live in Waltham, Massachusetts, and I am a marathon and ice swimmer. I've been doing the marathon swimming since about 2005 or 6. I think '06 was my first time doing the Boston Light Swim, which is an 8-mile swim in the harbor that I eventually ended up taking over. And a couple of years ago, I passed it on to the next leadership, which was Mina Elnikash, who's also a local, very fabulous marathon swimmer. The ice swimming, I've been doing that since probably about 2011. And yeah, I swim a lot. I'm also a freelance journalist. I do a lot of health writing, some sports writing, history writing. And I just finished up the manuscript for a memoir. Well, it kind of straddles the line between autobiography and memoir for Mickey King, who was the gold medalist in 1972 in the women's 3-meter platform diving event. So,
Wow.
yeah, kind of busy on all fronts, but like to keep it busy.
Yeah, yes, and I have a lot of triathletes who follow me, so you may have seen Elaine writes a lot of great articles for Triathlete Magazine. We often see her out there, so now here's the voice behind the pen, so to speak. Uh, yes. So, well, thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to chat with us. My goal here was to bring a variety of women leaders together to talk about Women's History Month and kind of just kicking off by thinking about what the theme is, which moving forward together, women educating and inspiring generations. What does that mean to you when you hear it?
Well, I think it means that you need to. We all have our own very unique life experiences and the different challenges that we've had to overcome. And I think if, as women, if we can take what we've learned, each time you get knocked back, take a note. Make a note of what worked, what didn't, and then if you can then at some point pass that on to somebody else, spare them the challenge of falling into that same pothole. By all means, I think that's a wonderful way to sort of share our knowledge and And I think also too, I mean, that's a very specific way to do it, but I think also just kind of being there for each other, listening, providing, not necessarily advice, but sometimes, we all just need somebody to listen without judgment. And, at some point, maybe you can suggest one thing or another, but I think there's a lot of power in just validating listening.
Oh, absolutely. I love it's kind of like two sides of almost the same story, right? Like take a note and move forward, learn from it, and at the same time, be that person who's there for somebody else. So I love it. I love it. I think that's a great approach.
Yeah.
Um, has there been an inspiring woman or a few inspiring women, a certain type of inspiring woman that you would call out as someone that's been very meaningful in your personal journey and learning?
Yeah, so I think the very first time I really kind of connected with the story of a woman leader or somebody who just like, oh wow, that really inspired me. Madeline Albright, she's totally not in the sports world, totally unrelated. But I went to Georgetown for my undergrad, and she lived a couple of blocks off campus in one of the townhouses in Georgetown. And anytime I went off campus, I would detour and walk by her house just to see, I'd like the Secret Service have fun. Is she home? Like kind of, not a stalker, but like, kind of like walk by, just
Curiosity.
have
Yeah,
a look. Is she
yeah,
home?
yeah.
And I got the chance to meet her in the Czech Republic the summer after my freshman year. And that was a really neat experience. I just admire, her strength, her diplomacy, the sophistication of her thought processes, and her clarity on democracy and standing up for what's right. And I think that has become even more present recently.
For sure.
Not to get into politics at all, but just I think it's a good reminder again to like look back. Who are these other badass women who've already dealt with this stuff? What can we learn from their stories? So she's one that I really have long admired. In the sports world, I do a lot of writing about the history of marathon
Hmm.
swimming, and I have naturally a particular interest in the women who swim marathons. And the good news is that there's a lot of us who do this,
There are, yes.
and we've been here in this space for a really long time and have often led the way, often beat the men. So there's a couple of women, like historical marathon women, who have always sort of inspired me. And one of the stories that I just adore is that of Florence Chadwick. Um, she swam the English Channel for the first time in 1950, and she did so in a pretty unconventional way. At the time, she was really unknown in the space, and she was twice divorced, living in San Diego, working in her mom's restaurant, and she was kind of at one of those inflection points where she had to decide what she was going to do with her life. And she saw an advertisement. So I guess this probably would have been like 1948. She saw an advertisement in the paper for a secretarial position with, I think it was called at that time Arabian Oil, might have been Standard Oil. I don't remember. The name changed a couple of times, but this big American oil company that was doing a lot of mining,
Yep,
extraction
yep.
in Saudi Arabia. And then they had office staff and they needed secretarial staff. And so it was an all expenses paid trip to Saudi Arabia for 2 years. She would have to stay there for 2 years. She would live in basically a barracks with the other secretaries. Um, and they would give her a decent salary. All of her room and board was covered. So it was a chance to make a lot of money in a relatively short period of time, but it meant walking away from everything she ever knew, and going off on her own to a place like Saudi Arabia,
Yeah,
which that, especially in the late 1940s, I mean, I can't imagine what that must have felt like to make that choice.
yeah.
So she gets there, she works really hard, she makes friends with some of the men who are working in Standard Oil. And the story goes, and again, it's hard to know how much of this is legend and how much of it is factual, but we're going to go with the fancy story that I love, and that's that she would go to there was an off license on there was like a local military base or something, and she would buy cases of beer, and she would bribe the men in her office to drive her to the ocean so she could train. So every day there was some soldier, because of course women couldn't drive in Saudi Arabia until what, like 2018, I think it was. So there was no way she was getting there on her own. She had to have this man help her. So they would take turns and they would drive her, and they would sit at the end of the pier. She was tethered to the end of the pier at the end of a rope, and she would swim in place for hours on end, and they would sit there and drink beer, and when she was done they would drive back. And so this goes on for effectively for 2 years. So she's training, and then when her time is up, the return trip was via steamer that was going to land in coastal France, basically Calais. And so they had like a day or two in port in Calais before going across the Atlantic to go home. So she got off the boat and never got back on. She just stayed in France. And she went around to the fishing villages and tried to find a pilot who would take her across the English Channel. And they were all like, no, we don't, nobody's ever heard of you. Like, this is crazy. We're not going to take you. She had also applied at the time. There was I think it was the Daily Mail, one of the newspapers in the UK, had started. They had this effort to sponsor a professional swimmers race across the English Channel, and so the first iteration of that was going to be held in the summer of 1950. So she's there. She gets wind that this thing is happening. So she writes to Sam Rocket, who was the guy who was organizing it, and says, please, please, please let me in. And he says, absolutely not. We have no idea who you are. This is for professional swimmers, blah, blah, blah. So she says, okay, well, forget you. And she does finally find a fisherman who would support her. And she swam the channel from France to England about a week and a half before the race. And it was such a sensation because, of course, she was beautiful. She made really good copy. The press photos were stunning. And she was fast and she was strong and she had a terrific swim. So she lands in England and has totally scooped the race. The newspaper that was supporting this event had to run these features about this unknown woman who came out of nowhere, spent all this time in Saudi Arabia with this singular goal, and then so she parlayed that into like a bona fide sports celebrity career. I mean, wow. I had read somewhere that she had sponsorships from, I think it was Pepsi and Janssen and a couple of other companies. And if you like adjust for inflation, she was one of the highest paid female athletes in the 20th century. She was on, Whose Line Is, or not Whose Line Is Anyway. She was on one of those TV shows that was real popular in the 50s. And, she became kind of a household name. We've, of course, generally forgotten about her because that's what we do. But but I just love that story, like the chutzpah it takes to just up and I'm just going to go to Saudi Arabia for 2 years because I really want to chase this goal, and then to pull it off and be so successful. She went on to do a lot of other swims, and she was definitely a star. So I love that story. I love Marilyn Bell's story. I mean, she was a teenager in Canada who just turned up at a race, and she actually was swimming against Florence. Florence was trying to swim one of the Great Lakes, and Marilyn shows up, and Florence got out after a few hours, but Marilyn finished, and she became this overnight sensation in Canada. There's just a lot of really cool stories out there about these women who've achieved stuff, and they've done it often without help from, everybody else.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. I did not know that story. I enjoyed it thoroughly. And it is the idea of the perseverance. And of course, as being women, and, we didn't have access and ability to do so many things. Mm-hmm. But this story and many, many others, I'm sure, that just highlight how women just don't give up.
Yeah.
And to kind of bring it back to what you were saying before about share that, help, encourage the next generations to kind of keep moving and share what we've learned and pass that along and kind of just keep going. Oh, that's awesome. Oh,
And
thanks for
that's true too for Florence's story. I mean, there is like a second chapter there later on. She eventually retired from swimming and stuff. I think she became a stockbroker, is what she ended up doing. But when Lynn Cox started out, she contacted Florence, and Florence was very helpful, sent her advice and suggestions and stuff, and was very supportive. And then in turn, Lynn Cox, I know, has been very supportive. Like I remember Ching Lee, who lives in Chicago. I'm
Yep.
sure you know
Yep.
her.
Yep.
Terrific athlete, amazing triathlete. When she was attempting to swim the English Channel when she was still in college, she had gotten in touch with Lynn Cox, and Lynn had been very supportive. So, it just kind of all rolls down one generation to the next.
Absolutely, absolutely. Oh, that's I'm all pumped up, ready for the day now. Listening to that, like these stories, they just give you an
Mhm.
energy that says, yes. Well, what can I go conquer now?
Yeah,
So I love to hear a new story. So thank you for that.
yeah, yeah.
How do you think in your area of expertise where you're not only as a swimmer but also as a writer and as a support source for swimmers, how do you think being a woman kind of uniquely positions you to help the swimmers and athletes who you are providing support and encouragement for?
It's an interesting question. I don't think there's anything innately feminine about what it is that I bring to the table. But my gut reaction to the question is, well, we're supposed to be good at multitasking, right? And there's a lot of multitasking that goes on with these events, and so, like particularly in the context of supporting a swim. You're thinking 4 feeds ahead, and um, so there's definitely an element there of um, you know the multitask, but I don't it's not to say that a man couldn't manage that. I mean,
Fair.
that's absolutely something that men can do. I think maybe in our culture, women tend to be more the supporters, the caregivers. And there is a very intense component of caregiving that goes on sometimes in these swims. Particularly the longer and more intense the swim gets, the more you need to look after somebody, and you might end up having to go to the hospital. Um, I mean, I just recently that was an experience I had. I was supporting a swimmer attempting an ice mile, and she had a successful swim, but we did end up making a visit to the
Yep.
hospital and being there. And again, it's not to say that it's something that a man wouldn't or couldn't do. I just think that we are sort of fundamentally socialized
Mm-hmm.
to kind of do that and to sort of have more skill building along the way that is helpful in those sorts of situations.
That's a great point. That I love how you said that we're socialized to do that. And it's always is it nature or nurture? Maybe it's a little bit of both, but I do think it's a lot of. I'm going to repeat that socializing.
Mm-hmm.
That women have taken that on
Mm-hmm.
over time. But here we are now. We're back in the day when we weren't allowed to do some of the things that we are now. We still have held on to that what's the word I'm looking for, skill, or you know because I do think you can learn to do it, like you said. There are men who, my husband is a huge nurturer, and he definitely can do that too. So
Mm-hmm.
I certainly appreciate that women are not the only ones who can, but it certainly does seem to kind of be something that we've been almost trained to do, and that is society's opinion that it is a feminine quality. Is it or is it not? Well, I don't know whether we'll ever know.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah,
think we'll ever know.
it's like it's just sort of these roles that we sort of get thrust into whether we want to or not. And it's just the way it is, and smash gender stereotypes. I'm 100% here for it, but
Yeah.
you know
but some of those stereotypes come from actual
right.
fact. So it's hard to tell where the line is, but we're going to allow guys to be multitaskers too.
Absolutely,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah,
And I think that's important too. I mean, we can celebrate women without bashing men.
exactly.
And I appreciate that you even brought that up, because this by no means is a way to say, oh, men are awful or can't do things, but we're highlighting the things
Yeah,
women can do. So
yeah,
very
exactly.
cool.
Yeah.
Well, in the sake of for the sake of time, um, give us your 1 minute. If you had 1 minute to teach us something that we can take away with us, on any particular level, what would you send us off with?
Um, well, I think if you, I get this question a lot, especially online. Like people reach out to me through my website, and they'll say, "I really want to swim the English Channel. How do I do it?" And my first bit of advice is actually a series of questions. Okay, where are you coming from? What is your background? How much volume are you doing right now? Have you talked to a pilot yet? You know, because that's kind of the big thing is like the pilots are booking 2 to 3 years out because it's gotten so popular.
Yeah.
So, like, I recently got an email from a woman who's like, "Oh, I really want to swim the channel on this specific day in 2025." And I said, "Do you have a pilot?" Like, and she said, "No." Okay, it's absolutely not going to happen. Besides the fact that you cannot pinpoint a specific day
No.
from the channel because of the conditions and the weather and tide, and the day she was pinpointing wasn't even in one of the preferred tide cycles. So
Okay.
there were a lot of things that this is. I'm really sorry to tell you this, but I can't help you achieve that specific goal.
Yeah.
However, if you do this, and this, you can do it in a couple of years' time. And here's some. You have to. There's two organizations that certify these swims. So really, the initial step should be deciding if you have a preference for one organization over the other, contacting them about getting the process started, and then finding the pilot. And there's the whole fleet. They're all really good. I have a couple that I especially love, but any of the pilots will take good care of you. And so it's a matter of just reaching out and finding, who's available on a window that makes sense for you, knowing that you're probably going to have to go over and sit and wait for 2 to 3 weeks. And even then, you might not get a chance to go. So I think the biggest takeaway with that whole thing is flexibility. You're not in control. Control the things you can control, which is your training, your nutrition, making sure you've got good crew, making sure you have all of your ducks lined up logistically ahead of time. But then when you get there, you just got to kind of let it go and just ride the tide.
Yeah, that is. I remember the first time that I found out what a long process it was to put that all in place. And kind of telling everyone, oh, yeah, be flexible, and to put all that time and effort in there and then get there, and it just seems like everything is out of your
Yeah,
control. It's really useful to know, to have that expectation,
yeah.
because you're really at the mercy of so many things that you just have no control over. So,
And
yeah,
it's
that
a
that
good
is
analogy for life in general. I mean, you got to get comfortable with the
for sure.
uncomfortable. You got to get comfortable with, you just don't have as much control as sometimes you wish you would. So how are you going to make the best of it when something goes
Yeah,
sideways? How are
yeah.
you gonna how are you gonna roll with that uncertainty?
Love it. Oh, Elaine, thank you so much for your stories, for your sharing your experience, and the insight into preparing for the English Channel. And like you said, that goes for any event that you might
Yep,
do. It could be a mile swim, and you could have come across the same situations.
exactly.
It could be, starting a business. It could be getting in a relationship. It really, sports and real life often
Yep.
kind of piggyback off each other for sure. So, but thanks so much for spending so much time with me this
Yeah, you're
morning.
welcome.
Tell everybody where they can find you if they need more advice about channel swimming or any of your other pieces of expertise.
Sure. Yeah. So I'm here on Instagram. I'm not terrific about checking it all that often, but I am here. I will eventually find your note. You can also find me on my website, which is elainekhowley.com.
Awesome.
And if you're looking for support services information, if you take that URL and put /CSS, that'll take you directly to the page that has that information.
Awesome. All right. Thanks again, Elaine. I'll see you sometime, I'm sure, out at Walden Pond or Nantasket or Pleasure Bay or something out in the water. And to everyone else, we'll tell be well, be real, and keep moving forward.
Yep,
Have a
very
great
good.
day.
You too. Bye bye.